Class. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 19, which is the progressive era. Now, when we're talking about the progressive era at this time in history, we're talking about bringing order out of chaos. Now, how do you bring order out of chaos, particularly in the progressive era of United States history? Well, the way to bring order out of chaos is let's impose white middle class morals and standards of behavior to immigrants. Well, that doesn't sound quite fair, but that's what they set out to do. We're going to impose white middle class standards onto all these new immigrants that are coming into the United States. Plus, we're going to curtail all further immigration from Southeastern and Eastern Europe. Why? Because we want nothing but pure Western European blood, English, Scandinavians. During the progressive era of United States history, the Eastern Europeans, the Southeastern Europeans, or the Mediterranean countries, they were considered just a class lower. All right. We've reached that point where white people are going to set the standards. Now, in the South, of course, we have segregation. Whites are in control, um, and at the same time, the white population of the South is attempting to practice disenfranchisement of the black population, or attempting to keep them from having the right to vote, right to mix with white people. Well, basically, to have their own society away from whites. Whereas black progressionists and their white supporters wanted to create organizations that would secure racial equality between the races in the South. Well, progressive origins lie in the modern populist movement. They attacked laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire economics, of course, as we know, is hands off by the government, trickle down economics, um, tax the less tax on the wealthy, less tax on the corporations, and as they make more money, it trickles down to the middle class and the poor. They wanted monopolies broke up or regulated to limit the power of corporate trust. And here we see Standard Oil, um, Carnegie Steel, such as those, because they saw those as threats to the American economic and political democracy. They advocated a fair or flat income tax that's equally fair to rich and poor. Um, they were primarily invested in the urban industrial America, the big cities, which is where the vast majority of the poor were, living in ghettos. Um, let's see. Basically, they practiced something called pragmatism, which is rejected laissez-faire economy and survival of the fittest, which had been practiced up until now. As we all should remember by this time in class, there was no minimum wage, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no Social Security. Um, Only the fittest survived. So, to progressives, the meaning of truth did not reside in some um, absolute doctrine or in books, but could only be discovered through experience. You had to experience to learn absolute truth. Book learning, and the consequences of your experience are what's going to lead you to practical consequences. It's kind of the same as every practice that a person would do, or every practice that the government does, or a corporation is going to have some consequence in society. They practice something called social gospel. This was embracing the teachings of Jesus Christ and use his ethical obligations for social justice towards the urban poor, or as we would see in today's world, what would Jesus do? Progressives this time would directly take the teachings of Jesus Christ and apply them to take care of the urban poor. Their largest believers, believe it or not, are going to, of course, be the middle class of ministers, lawyers, physicians, engineers, corporate management, and social workers. Some things never change. These were going to be the practitioners of progressivism. As part of this progressive progress, we're going to have something called muckrakers. Now, muckrakers are basically reporters that go out and try to find the sensationalist story. Like today's, or I'm not sure if they still have them, the National Enquirer or other tabloids that you get at the supermarket. They would go out and find the most sensational story they could, write it up, and it would just surprise and delight or astonish or sicken the common person. And I especially liked uh, these kind of stories on Rockefeller and his Standard Oil Company. Um, they also wrote on political machines such as the ones in New York, Chicago, Cleveland, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Philadelphia. Not only did Chicago and New York have major political where they could political machines that controlled who was elected or who got the support, all the other major cities of the United States did also. They wrote about the lynchings of Black Americans. You can imagine that this did not go over well in the South. If somebody from a Southern newspaper, of course, wrote about lynchings of blacks, then of course the KKK would step in and like burn a cross or threaten the writer's family, threaten the writer's family or whatever to get the story squashed. They also wrote about child labor in the mines, child labor in the factories. Um, they wrote about drug use, opium, particularly opium, cocaine. We won't talk about Coca Cola yet. And it was President Teddy Roosevelt who actually coined the muckraker name by saying they would dig down into the mud and rake through the mud just to get a sensationalist story. One of the best known books, of course, would be The Jungle or the sensationalist books. This was about the meat factories, the meat processing plants in the city of Chicago. How filthy they were. Whoops, my brain has left me. Where they would just cut the meat and there would be flies and maggots, unsanitary conditions, blood pooled up on the floor. Um, the workers not cleaning themselves, using old knives, old saws, old axes. Um, this shocked people who had always thought their meat was clean. Now they knew that, well, their meat was anything but clean, and they went a long way of explaining the number of food poisonings that people experienced that ate meat. Child labor. You had people where kids of the ages 5 years old up working in coal mines and factories. One of the best stories that I know about this happened in a factory not too far from where I live today. A 5-year-old girl walked into the factory. She never spoke. Nobody knew her name. Um, she worked for free for a great number of years. The factory owner let her stay live in the factory. Um, the people who worked there would bring her scraps of food to eat. And she actually lived in the factory until she died of lung disease, where she was given a pauper's funeral. For women, of course, they were especially brutalized during this era. They, of course, were not looked at as the equal sex. Um, the Hull House was created by Jane Addams and Ellen Starr. They were champions of social reform for women. They were staffed, the Hull House was staffed mainly by college educated women, professionally trained in, social work. Um, and they became the urban support system for women, particularly those that had a lot of children, those that were pregnant, not knowing what to do. This is a time when men who worked would get off of work, get paid, go to the bar, spend their money, bring none home to their wives. It was the Hull House that gave women in the urban areas, especially, recreational facilities, gave them social activities and educational classes. They called on women to take up civic engineering. They're saying, look, ladies, you're in charge of the household. You can change things if you so wish. Um, let's face it, you control the house, you control a lot of things. So it's up to you to engineer not only your household, but your man, if you want to straighten things up and make your life better. Um, they had settlement houses that led to social reform. In fact, they were the first line of humanitarian reform in urban areas. They created or joined by women's clubs. These women's clubs were all for social middle class women, social reform again. Middle class women reaching out to the poor. And since men are more or less closely absorbed with business, it come to pass that the initiative in all civic matters in urban areas passed over to the women. This is more of that progressive social reform. Um, you control the household, and by that control, you can successfully change your man and how you live and are treated. During the age of segregation, there were separate white women's reform movements or reform clubs, and there were black women reform clubs. Um, these black women reform clubs, they challenged white supremacist viewpoints. Of course, they were very popular in the South at that time. And they directly challenged or saw to it that black women were given the ability to raise healthy children. As you can imagine, that was not one of the big things in the segregationist South, was medical care for the black community. In 1903, the National Women's Trade Union League was created. You can think of this as a women's union, calling themselves domestic engineers. They were dedicated to securing higher wages and improving working conditions for men and women. They worked for an 8-hour workday. At this time in history, it was a 12, 14-hour day. Now, as you hear the alarm, it sounds like my time has disappeared. Just as we were getting to get into my National Association of Colored Women rant. And it was a good one. You'll miss it. But it has been riveting to talk to you today. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy this video.